Thank you for joining the City of Chicago's observance of the World Day of Remembrance. Today we recognize those whose lives have been forever impacted by traffic crashes. We must remember those who were killed in traffic crashes. We must support those whose lives have been forever impacted by traffic violence. And we must continue to act, pushing for changes on our roads to prevent any additional lives from being lost to traffic violence. We at the Chicago Department of Transportation are joining with community members, street safety advocates, and our Vision Zero team to remember, support, and act. We are in a crisis, but the City of Chicago believes that the goal of zero traffic deaths is possible. That's the mission and the commitment of Vision Zero Chicago: zero traffic deaths, zero crashes, and an end to traffic violence.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm your safe host, Shameka Turner. This episode of Safe TV is a very special one. Today, we're observing the World Day of Remembrance, Chicago style. We're taking this time to honor those who've lost their lives as a result of traffic violence. We will also show you what Chicago's Department of Transportation is doing to improve our roads and help save lives. All of our guests are special. Today, we're honored to have the head of our Department of Transportation, Gia Biagi. Commissioner, thank you for making time to talk about something that's so important to all of us, traffic safety.
No, I'm glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Welcome, welcome. Tell us, why is the World Day of Remembrance important to us as a city?
Well, it's important to our city, and it's important to cities across the globe, really. Vision Zero is all about the notion that we can reduce violence from traffic crashes and fatalities and serious injuries to zero. That is why it's a vision for zero. We know that it's possible, not only in cities across the globe where we hear about it, but right here in Chicago. And so it's really important today that we talk about what Vision Zero means, but then do a couple of things. And really, I think the three pillars are: we remember folks who have been victims of traffic crashes and traffic violence, that we also support folks who have been affected by it, and that we act. And that's something I hope we'll talk about today. You know, when it comes to speeding and it comes to traffic violence, that there are a lot of folks that are affected. It's certainly the person who gets hit by a car. There's also the driver of that car. There's also motorist injuries, vehicle-to-vehicle injuries. So it's about keeping people who are walking safe, people who are cycling safe, people in cars safe. These are things that are achievable. And so our goal is that everybody lowers the speed, lowers their own speed, but also, raises some awareness and has some empathy for folks who are out on the roadway with them. Give each other a break. You see somebody starting to cross the street, slow down. Give them a little space. Let them cross. And if we can each set a good example in the way that we drive, in the way that we move around our city, hopefully that can have a cascading effect where we have a safer city, fewer people injured, and certainly much fewer fatalities.
I like that. That sounds good. Okay, you keep mentioning Vision Zero. I know what Vision Zero is, but for those that are watching, what is Vision Zero?
Vision Zero is an international effort in cities across the globe that are working toward bringing down serious injuries and fatalities from traffic crashes to zero. That's it. It's really pretty direct. And so every city is different in terms of its geometry and how it's designed, in terms of whether people use more public transit or their individual vehicle, and how people move around the city. It all has different kinds of ways that happens. But Vision Zero is the same in all of those cities, that we fundamentally believe that we can do the things we need to do as a city, that we can use the tools we have in the toolbox in order to make our streets safer and bring that number to zero.
So with that being said, is it realistic? Is it a realistic, attainable goal? Is that something that we can do?
There are cities across the globe who have come down to zero. There aren't a lot of them, but I think it's really important that really we reach for an aspirational goal here. One fatality is too many, in any respect in our city. And so if we can set a really high bar for ourselves, we can start to bring those numbers down. And that's really the goal here. It's something that, as a city, we experience all kinds of violence. And we have to be upfront about that, and we have to have conversations about that and bring every tool that we have to bear across all of government and civil society together to make sure that we can make change in our city for the better. And this is just one category of that change where we can make our city a safer one, a more welcoming one, a more inviting one for all Chicagoans and then people who come and visit here and hopefully visit and stay.
Absolutely. I love that. Set the bar high, raise it high. I love that. Okay, so tell us, what is the city, the bar is high, what is the city doing to help us reach these Vision Zero goals?
Yeah, well, one of the things we're doing, and something that I hope you'll talk about a little bit, is the work of our Vision Zero team, where we have folks like yourself and a whole slew of people who are out and about in neighborhoods talking with folks about what does it mean to have pedestrian safety and bike safety, and how can we make our streets places for people, right? And that's fundamentally what we're talking about. You know, walking, biking, a stroller or a car or a bus, those are all ways of moving around. But at the end of the day, it's a human being who's doing it, right? It's a person that's riding a bike. It's a person that's driving that car. And so we have to think about ourselves as a collective, and that these are different ways of moving around. So as we educate each other and folks who visit our city in the ways that we can move around our city in a safer way, that's a big part of it, right? Nobody wants to hurt anyone else here. And so that's part of our role, and that's part of our Vision Zero team's role. But we're also doing a lot of things around infrastructure. So one of the really significant occurrences of this past year was Mayor Lightfoot's Chicago Works program, which is a $3.7 billion investment in infrastructure of all kinds across our city. And that's whether that's bridges or viaducts or street resurfacing, all the kinds of things you imagine when I say the words infrastructure. But what you also need to imagine when I say the word infrastructure is that there's pedestrian safety infrastructure, that there's bike and cycling infrastructure, that there are investments that we can make into our built environment that can do what we'd like to achieve with Vision Zero. That is, if we think about the work that we've been doing, for example, to invest in our cycling infrastructure, creating bike lanes, more protected bike lanes. Between this past year, this current year, and next year, we'll have over 100 new miles of bike lanes in our city. This city has never built so many bike lanes so fast in its history. It's really exciting. We also have dedicated funds, though, for pedestrian safety projects. In the past 2 years, we'll have put down, between this past year and next year, over 700 pedestrian safety projects. So we did 400 intersections worth of pedestrian safety. Those are things we might call bump outs, those changes in the geometry of the street that slow a car down. Pedestrian refuge islands, that's that piece in the middle of the street in a wider street where you can stop and you can take a minute and the traffic can go by and you can cross again. That's crosswalks. It's all kinds of pieces of those, really the places where people have the most injuries, which is at intersections, where we're investing millions of dollars into doing that. So as I said, we did 400 pedestrian safety improvements this past year. We'll do another 300 this coming year, so that's over 700 in a 2-year period, just like the bike lanes. This past year and this coming year, you're going to see massive improvements. I think another tool in our toolbox is around how do we affect changes in driver behavior. And so one of the things that we've been doing in a very sort of methodical, understated way is that as we are building out part of our cycling network and some of these transportation projects, we're also lowering the speed limit, particularly in residential areas where you want to go 20 miles an hour. 20 is plenty. We'd like to see that across the whole city, and we're working toward that. But that's something that across over 20 miles of our roadway network, we've reduced the speed limit to 20 miles an hour. And so this is a whole collection of influences that we can have on our built environment, both in terms of how we're affecting driver behavior, but we're changing the street geometry. But the biggest thing I think that we do is have conversations with communities about what does traffic safety feel like to them. You know, every neighborhood in Chicago is so different, right? In fact, every block is different. And you can't assume that what might work in one part of the city is going to work in another part of the city. So how do you get that answer? You have to listen. And that's what our Vision Zero team is doing. That's what our planners and engineers are doing at CDOT. We have to go out in communities and listen really well and figure out, okay, well, here's what our data is showing. That's one thing. Then here's what we observe when we go out there. That's another data set. And then here's what people tell us, their lived experiences on their streets. And that leads us to this perfect convergence of projects, right? So we match these different kinds of data sets with what people are experiencing on the streets. And that's how we define where our projects occur, what kinds of projects happen. And you can see for example, we've spent a lot of time in Austin and Belmont Cragin working on Vision Zero planning, right? And so we're starting to roll out those projects, whether that's 45 miles of new bike lane infrastructure on the west side to hundreds of pedestrian safety projects and intersection improvements. That is the outcome of data plus observation plus community engagement that get us there. So that's on the west side. Other things that we're doing in that lane are we've launched Vision Zero South Side, right? And so those are those deep community conversations about what does safety feel like, what does it look like, what are the tools we could bring to bear, and then the projects will follow. So now all of this planning, sometimes it can take longer than you want, but it's the right way to get there. We really believe that slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And if we work in a deliberate way with communities, if we listen really well, we can then define what the projects are. And then thanks to the Chicago Works program, we now have money to invest in that. And that's kind of how it all comes together.
That's awesome. I mean, 700 pedestrian
Safety improvements.
That's like one a day for 2 years.
It's a lot.
Yes, that is a lot. Okay. All right. So tell us, how can I and those watching help Chicago reach Vision Zero? How can we do that?
That's a great question. I think, one, we need you to participate. We need you to raise your hand and raise your voice, be at the table. And part of our job is to make sure that that table is welcoming and inviting and that we meet people where they are. That's our job. But our hope is that communities will come to the table and tell us what they're experiencing and help point us toward where in their neighborhood they'd like to see those improvements. That's a big part of what makes it effective. I mean, obviously, we would like folks to take safety precautions when they're out on the road. Please, if you're biking, please wear a helmet. Please follow the traffic laws. That's all very helpful, too. And then, of course, we need you to slow down. The next time you're out driving, and it's easy, especially during COVID, when we had much lower volumes of traffic, and the streets seem very clear, and then you look at your speedometer, and you're going a lot faster than you even thought you were. And so now that we have more traffic volume coming back, one, we need to get rid of those habits, maybe of going a little too fast, but we just need to give each other a break, right? Just slow down a little bit, take it easy, especially when you're getting toward an intersection where you know people are going to be crossing, especially around schools and parks, which is exactly where we have some of our speed camera infrastructure. It has to be near schools and parks, and that's our goal, is to keep kids safe. But think about that person who's crossing the street as you're coming toward them in your vehicle. That could be your mom. That could be your neighbor's kid. That could be your brother. That could be someone in your life. That's someone in someone else's life. And so if we give each other sort of that kind of empathy, and we imagine that everyone moving across our roadways, we're all part of a community together, and we just need to look out for each other, especially for our most vulnerable populations.
So you mentioned the changes in traffic during COVID. What did that look like, and how does that compare to like the nation's average?
No, I'm glad you asked. At first, when we had the stay-at-home order, people did stay at home if they could. Overall, traffic volumes dropped pretty dramatically. So did use of public transit and other ways of moving around the city. What's really notable, though, is we saw speeds increase, and that particularly relates to Vision Zero. Speeds went way up, in part because you don't have congestion, right, when many people are staying at home. And so, the fewer impedances to moving quickly, people just pick up the speed, right? And your foot gets heavier and heavier on the accelerator. And so we saw very high speeds during COVID, and some of those speeds have come down, but not quite enough. And the consequences are very severe. And in fact, if you look nationally, we have about 20,000 people a year killed in traffic crashes. It's a breathtaking number. Secretary Buttigieg, in fact, was just talking about this at the US DOT, that it is a crisis, that numbers everywhere are up in terms of traffic crashes. Here in Chicago, we've seen similar kinds of numbers. And in fact, just in the last 6 months, we're looking at numbers that are above our annual averages for the last 5 years. So many more people are getting hurt, and you couple that with speeds that we're trying to bring it down, but they aren't quite where they ought to be. You have sort of all of these factors combining to make for roadways where we need to take this seriously. We need to take additional measures. And again, thanks to the work that we've been able to do, whether it's through our Vision Zero team, whether it's through the outreach and engagement that we've been doing, we're able to queue up projects and then with Chicago Works infrastructure dollars to carry them out. So, but it's something that we're watching. I think it's, the patterns of traffic have changed a little bit too. You don't have a morning rush hour like you used to have. You're seeing some of that flattening there, especially with some companies that have allowed their workforce to stay at home if they can work at home. But again, we have plenty of folks who still need to move around the city, and many folks haven't returned to public transportation in the same numbers that they were before COVID. That's also has an impact, right? So folks are finding an alternative way to get to work, to get to school, and public transit is a very safe option. The more folks that are on public transit, the better. So we're watching all of these trends, and we're concerned about them. And in addition to the physical improvements that we can make, some of the behavior changes that we'd like to see affect, if we can get more folks taking public transit, that keeps them safe as well. And I think building out the infrastructure that brings in other modalities to the table that's also friendly to the climate, right? If we look at, for example, our bike share ridership that has just exploded over the last 2 years, and we're hitting close to 5 million rides in a single year, that is just phenomenal. So it shows you that folks are willing to travel by other means, right? And the vehicle really is the most dangerous form in terms of Vision Zero. So if we can build out that bike network, get people to use bike share or their own bikes, get people walking and using other forms of transit, that's all good, because it also helps folks to have a different experience on city streets and gives you a little more empathy. If you ride a bike and then you also drive a car, sometimes when you're driving the car and you see someone cycling on the road, you understand that experience. You might give them a little more room because you've been there.
Agreed. Okay, well, again, I'd like to thank you for your time, Commissioner Biagi. We'd like to thank you, the viewing audience, for partaking in learning about Vision Zero and how you can be safe, and for learning about how Chicago is working to ensure that the streets are, in fact, for everybody. Thank you, and stay safe.
My name is Michael Kent, and I'm the Vision Zero coordinator for the Chicago Department of Transportation. Vision Zero is the City of Chicago's commitment to ending traffic violence on our streets. So that means putting an end to traffic fatalities and serious injuries. World Day of Remembrance is the day to honor those whose lives were unfortunately lost in incidents of traffic violence. Unfortunately, we still continue to see a high level of traffic crashes across many neighborhoods in this city. However, I'm also optimistic that the sorts of projects that we at the city, in coordination with our partners in the community, are implementing will ultimately have a positive impact on significantly reducing the amount of traffic violence we see in Chicago. So today we are along Wrightwood in Belmont Cragin, and what we're looking at is a contraflow bike lane. So what a contraflow bike lane is the green paint along the street here that allows cyclists to move in the opposite direction of auto traffic on a one-way street. At the same time, though, cyclists can move with traffic in the opposite lane. So again, a contraflow bike lane allows two-way bicycle traffic on a one-way street. Well, I mean, the Northwest Center was a tremendous partner in helping us, the Department of Transportation, advocate for and ultimately implement the bicycle network and this bike lane here on Wrightwood.
I am Jeremy Cuevas. I am the youth organizer at the Northwest Center Chicago. In Belmont Cragin alone, there's 85,000 residents, and 27,000 of them are young people under the age of 16. So I run a youth leadership council of 17 students, and most of those students, they don't have their license yet. They're in high school. So they, their way of getting around the community, they're either walking, they're biking, they're doing other ways to get around. A lot of the students kept coming late to our center, and I was just always thinking, man, they're young people, they're probably at the store, whatever. But after talking to them and building relationships with them, we found that there was a real issue. Students were constantly having to take alternate routes to get to the center. They were taking smaller streets because they didn't feel safe riding on the main corridors. And in 2018, one of our youth council members was on his way to our office, and he was taking Belmont Avenue, which currently does not have any bike lanes. and he got doored. A car opened up their door and he flew about 15 feet and he broke his collarbone and he fractured his leg. So once we found out, that news and we visited him in the hospital is when our campaign really started, because he could have lost his life. And we were just really thankful that he was, alive. We began to organize. We began to meet with those people in power, whether there was our aldermen, city officials, different partners that we thought that could help us. We then took 8 students to Washington, D.C. to talk to our congressmen and our senators. And from that conversation, Senator Dick Durbin actually came to visit our community and began to, not just hear about it, but see it firsthand on what we were experiencing. And 2 years later, we finally got over 15 miles of bike lanes and over 11 divvy stations in Belmont Cragin. We received 2 divvy grants to, talk to residents, right? Get their opinions. We created surveys about bike share options, just asking folks if they knew what divvy was. And then we had countless of meetings with divvy where the residents, most importantly, and the youth were able to leave those meetings and be able to choose where they think the divvy station should be. And it was an awesome thing to see residents put stickers on maps and see them come to life a couple years later. So right now we're in the process of launching a series of talks within the community. So we're launching that in December, where we're gonna invite community residents who have or may not have been a part of this process, just to provide a space for them to talk, right? We're not just inviting cyclists, but we're also inviting motorists, right? People that drive on these streets. As you can see around Wrightwood, beautiful bike lanes, but you're watching countless of cars pass us up, right? And some of them were in favor of bike lanes, right? Some were not so much, right? And we just want to open up that discussion between the cyclists and the motorists, right? We know that there's tension between the two. I see it on a day-to-day basis. I bike these streets. People yell, people, sometimes don't follow the rules of the road. So we want to just encourage, hey, cyclists, we have to follow the rules of the road. Drivers, you also have a responsibility to follow the rules of the road as well. We bike these streets, we drive these streets together. So just encourage anyone watching this to, if you're a biker or a driver, you scooter around. I scoot around too, or whether you're a walker, just be considerate to those around you, right? People use different modes of transportation for different reasons. Some of them in our community, we use them out of necessity, right? Some people can't afford a car. Gas is $4 a gallon now, right? So just be considerate of others is what I would just encourage people.
We continue to honor the victims of traffic violence by just continuing our efforts to work together to identify ways to make our streets safer. We are implementing, in addition to bicycle lanes, pedestrian refuge islands, which are spots halfway across the street that allow pedestrians to have a shorter, safer crossing across certain streets. We're also implementing raised crosswalks, which serve to help slow traffic and make pedestrians more visible to drivers. We're also implementing what are called curb extensions or curb bulb outs, which are those little additions to street corners that allow a little more space for pedestrians to shorten the length of time or the distance that they need to cross the street. They also help serve to slow traffic. Back in 2019, we at the Vision Zero program held a Vision Zero West Side planning effort looking at Austin, Garfield Park, and North Lawndale. In those communities, we have continued to implement improvements based on the recommendations that came out of that community process. Well, just one example of a policy to make streets safer is working to reduce speed limits. Speed has been shown to be the leading determinant of the likelihood and severity of traffic crashes. So what that means is that the faster that a car is moving, the more likely it is to be involved in a crash. And if it's in a crash, the more severe it is likely to be. We encourage folks to let their local aldermen know that traffic safety is an important priority for them, and to work with us at the Department of Transportation to let us know the sorts of safety improvements they'd like to see in their neighborhoods.
We continue the fight, right? Paint is great on the ground, but one thing that we're working on is getting more protected bike lanes in our community, right? Things that can protect them more, make them feel more safer. I think that's the best way to honor those that are biking.
Everybody's responsible for keeping the streets safe. It's a priority of us at the city, but it's also should be a priority of folks in the neighborhoods and in the community. we've all got to do our part to make our streets safer and just to slow it down a little bit.
Thank you for tuning in to our special episode of Safe TV, where we observe the World Day of Remembrance 2021. We'd like to thank our partners at Chicago Rite of Silence, Ride Illinois, the Consortium to Lower Obesity in Chicago Children, the Northwest Center, and members of the Vision Zero Advocacy Group. Visit visionzerochicago.org to learn more about how our team is collaborating with neighborhood partners to make Chicago a safer city for all road users.